They say in Igbo land that a child is like a river, and a river always knows where it came from. But what happens when the man who calls himself the source abandoned the river before it even learned to flow? Today, I will tell you the story of a wedding that should have been beautiful, and it was. But before the dancing began, before the palm wine was poured, before the drums spoke their first word, there was a battle. Not with machetes, not with raised voices in the market square, but something far more dangerous than all of that. A battle over a seat. One seat. At the high table. On the most important day of a young woman's life. On one side stood a woman, Nkechi, who had worked her fingers to the bone for 23 years. A woman who boiled pepper soup at the crack of dawn, who paid every school fee, dried every tear, and whispered courage into her daughter's ears on every dark night. A woman who planned this wedding from nothing, who called in every favor, borrowed every kobo, and made something beautiful out of struggle. This woman was the bride's mother, her real mother, the only one who stayed. On the other side stood a man, Okechukwu, a man who had not sent a single naira in 20 years. A man who left when his daughter was too young to even remember his face. A man who only showed up when there was something to celebrate. And yet this man's daughter was getting married. And in Igbo tradition, that means something. The groom's family made their position clear. They said, "That man is your father. He is alive. And as long as he is alive, he must sit at the high table. Whether he was there for you or not, whether he paid a single bill or not." Tradition does not ask those questions. Blood is blood. A father is a father. But the bride's father had his own demand. He insisted that his new wife, Chisholm, a woman this bride had never lived with, never cried with, never called mama, must take the place of the mother on that high table. Not Nkechi, the woman who raised her. Not the woman whose hands built everything. But his new wife, Chisholm. Emeka the groom loved Adiz enough to want peace. But he also saw what was happening and his heart was torn in two. And the bride, Adiz, stood in the middle of all of it, dressed in burgundy and gold, coral beads around her neck, her mother's love stitched into every inch of her wrapper. She had to make a choice. What do you do when tradition demands you honor a man who never honored you? What do you do when the woman who sacrificed everything for you is being pushed aside on the very day that was supposed to crown her labor? Stay with me, because before this story ends, an old man with a carved wooden staff will stand before an entire compound of people and say the words that every absent parent in this world needs to hear. And a bride will look her father in the eyes and teach him something that 23 years of living away from her never could. This is the story of Adiz, daughter of Nkechi, the bride of two mothers. If you love African folktales like this, don't forget to subscribe, comment, and join our storytelling family for more magical tales. In the heart of Agida, where the Great Lake breathed like a living thing and the Irako trees stood as tall as the pride of ancestors, there lived a young woman named Adiz, meaning daughter of a king. But the name was a cruel joke the village told without laughing. Adiz had never known the warmth of a king's hand, only the firm and tireless love of a woman who had raised her alone. Her mother, Nkechi, was not a woman of silver anklets or fine osso oak wrappers. She was a woman of calloused palms, of early mornings and late nights, of boiling pepper soup at the crack of dawn and selling it beside the Agida road before the cocks finished crowing. It was with those same hands that she had plaited Adiz's hair, sewn her school uniforms, paid her school fees, dried her tears, and held her upright when the world threatened to knock her down. Adiz's father, Okechukwu, had left when she was barely old enough to remember his face. He had gone to the city of Onitsha. Some said for work, others whispered for a woman. Either way, he had never sent word, never sent money, and for many years, never sent even the shadow of himself back to Agida. Nkechi had wept in silence, behind closed doors, where only the walls of her modest house could hear her sorrow. But in the morning light, she dried her face and showed Adiz only strength. "You are my sunrise," Nkechi would tell her daughter each morning, "and I will not let any cloud take your light." So Adiz grew, like a wild yam that finds a way through hard soil, roots going deep even without a farmer's care. She grew beautiful, not in the way of lazy rivers, but in the way of a strong current that moves with purpose. She was gentle in speech but fierce in resolve, and the whole of Agida watched her with admiring eyes. By the time Adiz was 23, she had completed her studies at the Polytechnic in Owerri. and returned to the village not with arrogance, but with a quiet confidence that made elders nod their heads in satisfaction. She was, in the words of the oldest woman in Aguda, Mama Ifioma, a pot that was well fired. She will not crack when boiling water is poured into her. It was in this season of her fullness that Emeka came into her life. Emeka was a young man from the neighboring village of Nkwisi, the only son of Chief Nwosu, a man of considerable property and louder reputation. Emeka himself was not like his father in temperament. He was quieter, more deliberate, a man who listened before he spoke and thought before he acted. He had gone to the University of Nigeria in Nsukka, studied engineering, and returned to serve his people by building the bridge over the small river that separated Nkwisi from the rest of the road. Their meeting was unremarkable in the way of true love. He had stopped by Nkechi's roadside stall to buy pepper soup one evening when the harmattan had bitten hard into his bones. Adiz had been the one serving. Their eyes had met over a clay bowl of steaming broth, and something ancient had passed between them, something that did not require explanation. By the time the dry season came to an end, Emeka had been to Nkechi's compound 4 times, each visit longer than the last, each conversation stretching into the quiet hours of evening. He had spoken to Adiz with the kind of respect that a man reserves for things he considers sacred, and when he finally told her that he wished to marry her, Adiz had looked at her mother Nkechi first, as she had always done for every important decision. Nkechi had watched Emik with the careful eye of a woman who had been deceived before, but she saw in Emeka what she had long prayed to God for, a man who saw her daughter clearly and loved what he saw. "He is a good man," Nkechi said that night, as they sat by the small kerosene lamp. "But good men can be surrounded by difficult people. Watch the tree, but also watch the roots." Adiz had laughed softly, not knowing then how prophetic her mother's words would be. For the trouble, when it came, would not come from Emeka. It would come from the direction she had long ago stopped expecting anything from, the direction of her father's compound. News travels fast in Igbo land, carried on the wind and in the mouths of market women. Before Adiz could even begin to think of Uli designs and George wrappers, word had reached Onitsha that her father, Okechukwu, already knew of the impending marriage. He sent no letter. He sent no message through a trusted elder. He simply appeared one Tuesday morning like a spirit that had decided, after years of wandering, to reclaim a home it had abandoned. He arrived in a white Toyota bus with a bag on his shoulder and a new wife, Chisholm, on his arm, dressed in expensive clothes that spoke of money spent on appearances rather than substance. Okechukwu had aged, but not in the way that men who labor and sacrifice age. He had aged in the way of men who eat other people's harvests. He was heavier, smoother, his eyes carrying the confident gleam of someone who had never faced true consequence for his actions. He walked into Nkechi's compound as though he had left only yesterday, as though 20 years of absence were merely a long market trip. Nkechi was at her stall when she received word. She returned home to find him sitting on the bench outside her door, his new wife standing slightly behind him, already cataloging the modest surroundings with thinly veiled disdain. "Nkechi," he said, as if greeting an old friend. She looked at him for a long moment, long enough to let him understand that she was not a woman who had forgotten, only a woman who had chosen to continue living despite what she remembered. "What do you want, Okechukwu?" He spread his hands wide, his smile practiced and easy. "Is it not my daughter that is getting married? Am I not her father? Have I not come to take my rightful place?" It was Adiz herself who had heard the commotion and emerged from the inner room. When she saw her father, her face did not crumble as might have hoped, nor did it harden as Nkechi might have feared. It simply became still, the way still water is not empty, only deep. "Papa," Adiz said quietly. "My daughter," he replied, rising and opening his arms. She did not walk into them. She stood where she was. "When did you arrive?" The question was simple. The weight behind it was not. Over the days that followed, Okechukwu made his intentions known without subtlety. He visited Chief Nwosu, Emeka's father in Nkwisi, uninvited, unannounced, and introduced himself as Adiz's father, speaking with the authority of a man who had paid every school fee and been present at every meal, which was, of course, the opposite of truth. Chief Nwosu, who was a man of tradition, received him respectfully, as one receives even an enemy elder, with kola nut and hot water. But his wife, Lolo Ngozi, had heard enough from her son to know the full story. She sat quietly during that visit, watching Okechukwu with the patient eyes of a woman who was already forming her conclusions. After he left, Lolo Ngozi turned to her husband Chief Nwosu and said plainly, "That man is a thief who has come to steal credit for another woman's harvest." Chief Nwosu, who trusted his wife's judgment in all matters of character, said nothing, but he nodded. It was then that Okachukwu's demand began to circulate through the villages like a bitter rumor. He insisted, loudly, repeatedly, and to anyone who would listen, that his new wife, Chisholm, must be the one to sit in the mother's seat at Adi's traditional wedding. He argued that as her father's wife, it was Chisholm who held the proper title of Ayam, the woman of the house, and that it would be a disgrace to tradition to seat Nkechi, a divorced woman, in that position. Custom is custom, he told elders at the village square. The wife of the bride's father is the one who must be honored. What he did not say, what the wind, however, whispered clearly, was that it was not tradition he was defending. It was pride, the kind of pride that has no foundation and so must borrow someone else's structure to stand upon. Okechukwu was out there, moving from compound to compound, trying to lay down his demands for the wedding. Meanwhile, Nkechi was doing what she knew best, working her heart out. Every morning, long before the sun peaked over the horizon, she was up and ready, her wrapper snug around her chest, her head filled with lists and plans. Just like when she used to carry firewood. She was the backbone of this wedding preparation, juggling everything like a pro. From coordinating with the women's group at church to haggling over food prices at Agita Market, she was on it. She tasted soups, turning her nose up at those that didn't meet her standards for her daughter's big day. Can you imagine? She even inspected the canopies and chairs that would be hired, ensuring they were just right. And let's not forget the Asibi fabric. She chose a rich burgundy, a color that whispered joy without screaming it. Nkechi wasn't just relying on what little Adiz and Emeka had saved. No way. She quietly borrowed money from her traders' cooperative, knowing how to navigate these tricky waters. She called in favors from women who had once savored her pepper soup during tough times. They were more than happy to return the kindness. And when it came to Emeka's family, she showed up at every joint planning meeting, notebook in hand, exuding a calm, business-like vibe that earned her mad respect from Lolo Ngozi. That woman, Lolo Ngozi remarked to her husband after one of those meetings, that woman is the real chief of this wedding. Can you believe that? She was the one making things happen while Okechukwu sat back and did nothing. Not a single tuber of yam, not a bag of rice, not even a hint of his presence at any planning meeting. He only showed up to make demands and then vanished back to the guest house in town where he and Chisholm were staying, probably funded by some new business deal that had nothing to do with Adi's happiness. One quiet evening, as Adiz and Emeka sat down to figure out the seating arrangements, the tension in the air was palpable. Emeka, always careful with his words, finally brought up the elephant in the room. "Ada," he said, using that serious tone he reserved for important matters, "what will we do about your father's demand?" Adiz paused, her fingers tracing the edge of the notebook in her lap. "What do you think?" she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Emeka took a moment, choosing his words as if they were precious stones. "I think your mother is the one who built you. I think the seat of honor belongs to the person who truly earned it. And I think my mother agrees with me." "Your family?" she asked, a little surprised. "My mother especially," he said, a knowing smile playing on his lips. "She told me, Emeka, do not let that man sit on another woman's harvest and call it his farm." That made Adiz laugh for the first time in days, a real, belly laugh that filled the room with warmth. But it faded quickly as the reality of their situation crashed back in. Her father hadn't made a quiet request. He'd made a public declaration, and in Igbo culture, public declarations need public responses. Ignoring him would create a different kind of wound, the kind that disrespects an elder, no matter how undeserving. And on top of that, Emeka's family had their own stance, made crystal clear. Chief Nwosu had pulled Emeka aside and said, "My son, I will not sit in a hall where a man is not given the seat of a father." It wasn't said with malice. It was a principled stance from a man who understood the weight of fatherhood. He wouldn't allow the ceremony to mock the fathers based on how traditional he is. Adiz felt the pressure building, caught between her father's pride, her in-laws' ultimatum, and her mother's quiet dignity. Then, one Thursday morning, 3 weeks before the wedding, the sign came. An old man with a walking stick knocked on Nkechi's compound gate. His arrival felt like a breath of fresh air. He had a kind face, weathered but wise, and his eyes sparkled with a depth of understanding. Matsi Obiora was so old that children in Agito were no longer sure exactly how old he was, and the man himself claimed to have lost count somewhere around the age of 85. He walked with a carved wooden staff that had been with him so long it had taken on the color of his skin, and he wore the white thread of an elder around his wrist like a mark of rank that no title or wealth could counterfeit. He was not related to Nkechi or Adiz by blood, but he was connected to them by something older than blood, by the web of community that Igbo people have always known is the true fabric of life. He had once, 40 years ago, helped Nkechi's own father when he was in a land dispute, and the debt of gratitude had passed silently through generations like water moving underground. When he arrived at the compound that Thursday morning, Nkechi came out to meet him and knelt in greeting. For whatever she had endured, she had never lost the grace of Igbo courtesy. "Rise, my daughter," he said. "I have not come to receive obeisances. I have come because I heard that a wrong is being constructed in this compound, and I am too old to watch wrong things be built in silence." He was given a chair in the shade of the mango tree. He was given water and kola nut, which he broke and prayed over in the old way, calling on Chukwu Okaik and the ancestors to witness what was about to be said. Adiz sat beside her mother. Emeka, who had been informed, arrived quietly and sat with them. And Matsi Obiora spoke. "I have heard what Okachukwu is demanding," he began, his voice steady as drum beats, carrying the cadence of a man who had spoken important words his whole life. "And I have heard the position of the groom's family. I have come to say what I know and to advise what I believe." He looked at Adiz. A father who plants a seed in the ground and walks away is not a farmer. He is a man who wasted a seed. The farmer is the one who waters it, who chases away the birds, who puts a fence around it in the rainy season, who digs around the roots when the soil hardens. That is the one who deserves to eat the fruit. He paused, letting the silence do its work. "Your mother," he said, "is the farmer. There is no tradition in Igbo land, none that our ancestors would recognize, that says a man who abandons his child may return to claim the harvest simply because he contributed to the planting. Our people say, the one who brought the kola nut brought life. Your mother is the one who brought life, every day, for 23 years. He then turned to speak of the groom's family's position. Chief Nwosu is not wrong to be offended. A man of honor is right to refuse to participate in a ceremony that celebrates dishonor. But I would counsel something different from complete withdrawal. I would counsel that the groom's family make their position known clearly at the ceremony, through the placing of seats, and through words, not through absence." He looked at Emeka. "A wedding is not only the beginning of a union between two people. It is a public declaration of the values that will govern that union. If you allow wrong to sit in the seat of right at the beginning of your marriage, you invite that wrong to continue sitting there for the rest of your lives. But if you speak, if you let the truth be declared openly, before witnesses and before the ancestors, then your marriage begins on solid ground." He looked finally at Adiz. "The question, my daughter, is whether you have the courage to stand, not in defiance, not in bitterness, but in truth. Can you look at your father, who is still your father, for that cannot be undone, and tell him what is true? That you love him, that you forgive him, but that honor belongs to those who earned it?" Adiz did not answer immediately. She looked at her mother's hands, those hands that had known fire and water and market dust. And she knew. "I can," she said quietly. "I will." Matsi Obiora nodded. "Then I will come to your wedding," he said, "and I will bring my staff. And if any man tries to make wrong sit in the seat of right, he will hear from me the words of our fathers." He rose slowly, took his staff, and walked back through the compound gate, leaving behind him the particular stillness that follows the speaking of deep truth. The day of the traditional wedding arrived dressed in the colors of late, dry season. A sky stretched brilliant and mercilessly blue. Sunlight poured like warm honey over the red earth, and a restless breeze that carried the scent of palm wine, frying fish, and wood smoke from the cooking tents at the edge of the compound. The compound of Chief Nwosu in Nkwisi had transformed overnight. His beautiful mansion had once been familiar earth, and clay now shimmered beneath canopies of burgundy and gold. Long rows of plastic chairs were wrapped in fabric, The high table stood elevated like a small throne of expectation. Women moved in clusters, their wrappers flashing emerald, indigo, and crimson. Laughter floated and broke and rose again. The talking drums had begun their conversation at first light, calling the village to witness not just a union, but a reckoning. Adiz sat inside the bridal room while the village prepared itself. Her attire was deep burgundy and gold, the colors of a sunset that does not apologize for its brilliance. Coral beads rested around her neck and wrists, cool and heavy, a reminder of ancestry and weight. Uli patterns traced her skin in delicate lines, stories etched in ink, symbols older than grief. Her veil rested lightly over her shoulders, but her breath felt heavier than cloth. She had imagined this day as a child. In those imaginings, there had been laughter, music, her mother's smile, her father's proud nod. She had not imagined choosing between them. Outside, Nkechi moved through the compound with quiet urgency. She had arrived before the sun fully claimed the sky, as she had arrived early to every hardship in her life. Her wrapper matched Adiz, a CB chosen with care. Her gold head tie rose like a small crown above her brow, steady and dignified. Around her neck lay a single strand of coral beads that had belonged to her own mother, a circle of inheritance, unbroken. She directed the young women arranging trays of colonnuts and garden eggs. She corrected the placement of the palm wine calabashes with gentle authority. She smoothed tablecloths, adjusted chairs, and retied ribbons that were already straight. She could not stop herself from being useful. Usefulness was the language in which she had always said love. Each time her eyes drifted toward the high table, her hands paused for a fraction of a second. The seat to Adiz's right, the place of the mother, was prepared. A gold cushion, a small garland of fresh flowers. Nothing ostentatious. Just enough to say, I was here. At the far entrance of the compound, a car door slammed. The drums faltered, then continued. Okachukwu arrived with Chisholm later than he should have, in the deliberate way of men who believe their presence is ceremony enough. He wore a well-ironed senator suit the color of fresh cream, and a red cap tilted slightly, as though even gravity should negotiate with him. His beard was trimmed sharp. His shoes shone. Chisholm stepped beside him, wrapped in expensive lace, her perfume trailing ahead of her like an announcement. People turned. Whispers moved like wind through dry leaves. Okachukwu walked into the compound with the posture of a man who had come to collect what was his. His eyes moved slowly, assessing the canopies, the elders' section, the musicians. Then his gaze lifted and settled on the high table. He saw it, Nkechi's seat. He did not yet see his own. His smile thinned. He walked toward the usher nearest the aisle, a young man from Nkwisi whose white shirt was already damp beneath his arms. The boy swallowed but held his ground. There is an error, Okachukwu said, his voice smooth but edged. My seat should be at the high table. The usher bowed his head slightly. Biko, sir. There is no error. This is the arrangement made by the family. The word family hung in the air like a dare. Okachukwu's jaw tightened. He did not raise his voice, but something in his stillness sharpened. His eyes scanned the compound until they found Matsi Obiora seated among the elders, carved staff resting between his knees, gaze steady and unhurried. The old man did not look away. For days after his visit, decisions had been made quietly, not out of revenge, but out of correction. The elders had spoken, Emeka had spoken, Adiz had spoken, and the truth had been given a seat. Okachukwu began walking toward Matsi Obiora, but before he could reach him, another figure stepped into his path. Adiz. The compound seemed to tilt toward her. She walked slowly, each step deliberate, coral beads clicking softly against one another. The sunlight caught the gold in her wrapper, making her seem almost aflame. Her face was calm, but her pulse thundered so loudly she was certain someone must hear it. She stopped before her father. Papa, she said. Her voice was steady. It surprised her. I am glad you came. Truly. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Pride, perhaps, or expectation. Your seat is ready for you, she continued. You are my father. You are welcome at my wedding. He lifted his chin slightly. My seat should be at the high table. A murmur rippled through the compound. Adiz's fingers curled gently into her palm beneath the folds of her wrapper. Papa, she said again, softer now. My mother built this day. She has been building it for 23 years. Her throat tightened. But she did not look away. She woke before dawn. She worked when no one was watching. She carried me when you were gone. She paid school fees when there was no money. She stitched my dresses by hand. She held me when I cried for you. The air grew thick. I cannot take from her what belongs to her, Adiz said. I will not. The drums had stopped completely now. Even the breeze seemed to pause. But you are my father, she continued, her voice trembling at the edges but refusing to break. And I want you here. I want you to bless me. I want you to sit in the seat that has been prepared for you. Please, let this day be beautiful. For me. Okechukwu stared at her. He saw the uli patterns on her skin, the markings of heritage. He saw the coral beads, symbols of lineage. He saw the confidence in her posture, not defiance, but self-possession. For the first time, perhaps, he saw the woman she had become without him. Chisholm's hand slipped around his arm, fingers pressing lightly. People were watching. Matsi Obiora's staff tapped once against the ground. Not a command, just a sound. A reminder. Something complicated moved across Okechukwu's face. Pride warred with embarrassment. Authority wrestled with exposure. For a heartbeat, it seemed as though anger might win. Adiz felt her heart crack open in her chest. Then, very slowly, Okechukwu exhaled. He looked at the high table once more. At Nkechi. Nkechi had not moved. Her back was straight, her face composed, but her hands were clasped tightly in her lap beneath the table, knuckles pale. Their eyes met. Years of silence lived between them. Years of absence. Years of survival. Okechukwu looked away first. Without another word, he turned. Each step toward the elders' section felt louder than the drums had been. His shoes struck the earth with finality. The crowd parted. The seat prepared for him waited, cushioned, dignified, undeniably present. He reached it. He hesitated. And then he sat. The breath the compound had been holding released all at once. The talking drums exploded back into sound. Louder, faster, triumphant. Women ululated. Men clapped their hands against their palms. The breeze returned, lifting the edge of canopies and scattering tension like dust. At the high table, Nkechi closed her eyes for a brief second. Not in victory, in relief. Adiz felt her knees weaken, but she did not stumble. She turned toward her mother and walked back to the high table, each step lighter than the last. When she reached her seat, she bent slightly and touched Nkechi's hand. For a second, mother and daughter simply looked at each other. No words were needed. The ceremony resumed. The presentation of kalanuts, the pouring of libation, the negotiation of bride price formalities already settled but reenacted for tradition's sake. Laughter returned, cautious at first, then full-bodied. But something had shifted. The seating had rearranged more than chairs. It had rearranged history. When the time came for parental blessings, Adiz first knelt before her mother. The compound watched. Nkechi's hands trembled as she placed them on her daughter's head. You will not shrink yourself for anyone, she whispered. You will not beg for the space you deserve. Your home will be built on truth. Tears slid down Adiz's cheeks, but her spine remained straight. Then she rose and crossed to where her father sat. A quieter tension returned, not sharp, but fragile. She knelt again. Okechukwu looked at her for a long moment before placing his hands on her head. His palms were warm, familiar. May your husband honor you, he said, his voice lower now. May your children know you are strong. It was not an apology, but it was not arrogance either. And sometimes, in the language of men like him, that was as close as repentance came. When Adiz stood, the drums swelled again. Emeka stepped forward to join her, his eyes bright with pride, not just in marrying her, but in the courage she had shown before an entire village. The feast began. Palm wine flowed. Laughter rose like birds startled into flight. But beneath the music and celebration, something deeper had settled into place. The truth had not shouted. It had simply taken its seat. And in doing so, it had changed everything. The wedding proceeded in the way of good things, with noise and color and laughter that pressed against the walls of sorrow until the sorrow had no room left to stand. Emeka's family performed their arrival with ceremony. The men came dancing first, bearing gifts on their heads and in their arms. The women following in a line of magnificent rappers, singing the marriage songs that women in Nkwisi had sung for generations. Old Chief Nwosu came in full regalia, his eagle feather, his ivory armband, his red cap tilted at the angle of assured authority. And when he entered the compound, he went first not to his son, not to the high table, but to Nkechi, the mother of the bride. He stood before her and said, loudly enough for all to hear, I salute you, Nkechi, daughter of Agita. Your labor is the foundation of this day. Our family receives the fruit of your tree with gratitude and with honor. Nkechi received his words with grace, her hands clasped together, her eyes bright with the tears she was too proud to shed in public. She bowed her head. I receive your kindness, Chief Nwosu. May what is joined today remain joined. The crowd erupted, and the women ululated until the air rang. It was Matsi Obiora who spoke the formal words of wisdom, as it had been arranged. After the kola nut was broken and the prayers said, when the palm wine had been served and the gathering was fully assembled, the old man rose with his staff and asked for quiet. He spoke slowly, the way only very old people and very wise people know how to speak, as if each word had been aged in the chest before being allowed out. In Igbo land, he began, we say that a child is not an island. A child is a river, and a river has a source. Today, we have seen what happens when a man abandons a source and tries to claim the river. He cannot. The river knows where it came from, and the river goes where it chooses. He looked at Adiz and Emeka, who sat side by side at the high table, hands interlaced. This woman you see before you, Adiz, she is the daughter of Nkechi. This is what the blood says, and this is what the truth says, and this is what the years say. She is also the daughter of Okachukwu, for biology is not erased by absence. But honor, my people, honor is not biology. Honor is not a name. Honor is what a person does every day, in the dark and in the light, when no one is watching and when everyone is watching. He paused. The compound was very quiet. Let every father here hear this today. Let every mother hear it. Let the young people who will one day be parents hear it and carry it home. The seat of honor at the table of your child's life is not given to you by custom or by title. It is given to you by love, by sacrifice, by presence. Those who planted, watered, and tended, they shall eat of the fruit. Those who walked away shall be welcomed back if they return with humility, but they shall not take what they did not earn. He looked now at Okachukwu, seated among the father's family, his red cap still on his head, his face unreadable. It is not too late, Matsi Obiora said, and his voice was not cruel. It was the voice of a man who has seen too much life to waste it on cruelty. For any man here who has been absent, for any father who has forgotten that his children are still waiting, even when they have stopped saying so, return, not to claim credit, not to sit in the seat of honor. Return because they are your children and they deserve to know you. That is enough. That is all. Okachukwu did not speak, but for the first time since he had arrived in Agita, he was not performing. His shoulders were slightly lower. His hands rested on his knees. Something in him had been reached, not broken, not crushed, but reached by the only force strong enough to move a prideful man. The undeniable truth spoken with dignity before witnesses who would remember. After the ceremony, as the feasting began and the compound filled with the smoke of roasting meat and the sweet heaviness of palm wine, Adiz went to where her father sat, alone for a moment, Chisholm, her stepmother, having gone to join the women. She sat beside him. She did not speak immediately, and neither did he. They sat in the way of people who share a wound that is not yet healed but is perhaps, for the first time, being properly looked at. I don't hate you, Papa, she said finally. He swallowed. I know I have not. I know, she said. I know. She placed her hand briefly over his, then stood. I have a husband now, a family. The door is not closed. She walked back to the dance floor, to Emeka, who took her hand without asking why she had gone. He already knew. Nkechi watched her daughter dance, and the tears she had been holding all day finally came. Not tears of sorrow, but the kind that come when something long and difficult finally arrives at its proper end. The kind that feel, strangely, like rest. And so the wedding of Adiz, daughter of Nkechi, was remembered in Agita and Nkwisi for many years, not for its food, though the food was excellent, nor for its decorations, though they were beautiful, but for the truth that was spoken that day beneath the canopy, before the ancestors and the living, in the presence of an old man with a carved staff who had refused to let wrong sit in the seat of right. The moral our people carry from this story is ancient and simple. Let each person receive the fruit of their own labor. A child belongs to those who raised them. Honor belongs to those who earned it. And a wedding, like life itself, is truest when it does not pretend. If this story hit home, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for African folktales and moral stories every week. Drop a comment. Whose side were you on? The mother, the father, or tradition? Let's talk about it.